With the college football season being over and the deadline for underclassmen to declare for the 2015 NFL Draft finally upon us, I figured this was the perfect time to reveal another 2015 NFL mock draft. It's a 2-round edition. You can see all of my picks in the description box down below. Now, there are a few things that I want to talk about pertaining to the 2015 NFL Draft and this upcoming draft cycle over the next 3.5 months. I won't talk so much about the particular picks, just certain trends about the draft, what I see as strengths and weaknesses of this class, some of the trends that I think you're going to see, and what have you. First and foremost, I want to caution all of you to beware of the narratives that you're going to hear. You're going to hear, among other things, that the NFL people know better than you do. In a lot of cases, they really don't. So if you have opinions about it, and you have people in the NFL telling you that you don't know what you're talking about, frankly, a lot of them don't know what they're talking about either. Just because they're in a certain position doesn't mean that they're qualified to do it, and doesn't mean that they know what the hell they're doing, and we see that to be true so often the case. Also, you'll hear a lot from NFL media types that they will know better about this process than you do. A lot of times the snobbery of they get paid to talk about this and you do not. Well, Todd McShay gets paid to talk about this, and he's a blooming idiot. So what exactly does that mean? So make sure you do your own research if you're going to formulate real opinions about the 2015 NFL Draft, the prospects, who gets taken by whom and when. Make sure that if you're going to have an opinion, you educate yourself to have that opinion. Don't go off of the group speak. Don't fall into the trap of everybody else's narratives. I know that's going to happen a lot when it comes to, in particular, Jameis, Winston, and Marcus Mariota. But I caution you again, don't do that. Take the blinders off. Expand your horizons, open your eyes, and trust what you see. Because I promise you, you will find that what you see, in particular when it comes to this 2015 NFL Draft class, will be a lot different than the narratives that have been set in place already and will continue to be advanced over the next few months. Now, in terms of the quality of this class, I do think myself, my opinion, that this class is better than the 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2013 recent draft classes. I do. I don't think this class is as good as 2012 or as the 2014 class was, but I think this is a solid class. It's going, in terms of overall prospects, it's not going to look as good as last year, so that's maybe going to devalue it some, and you'll probably start to hear that narrative, talking about narratives, about how this isn't the strongest draft, this is kind of a weak draft. Well, compared to the 14 draft, it's going to look kind of weak, but that doesn't mean that it is a weak draft in and of itself. I still think this is a solid draft with some really good talent, and like I said, to me, it's a good draft. I would equate maybe to 2011, where so many of those top picks that were talked about not being really ready to make immediate contributions, and that this was going to be a weak draft. You know, the only prospects in the top half of that draft, for the most part in the first round, that didn't pan out were the quarterbacks, sans Cam Newton. Everybody else, you know, that panned out were non-quarterbacks. The quarterbacks were big-time busts. That's Locker, that's Gabbert, and that's Ponder. But there were so many other guys in that draft class that really became big-time NFL contributors. That could be something similar to what we see here with this 2015 NFL draft class. In terms of the strengths and weak spots for the prospect classes here, I think in terms of strengths, you got to look at running back. This is, to me, perhaps the strongest area of prospects in this year's NFL draft. There's talent at the top, there's talent in the middle, there's talent at the back end, there is talent all throughout. If you are a team looking for running back help, especially between the tackles type of runners, this is a great draft class for you. This is a great class of edge rushers as well. I don't know if the depth goes all the way through the entire draft, but in the first 3 or 4 rounds, there is a lot of quality edge rushing talent. And in today's NFL, where passing offenses are so valued and the ability to defend opposing receivers is so minimized by the rules in place, you have to be able to limit the amount of time a quarterback can sit back there and pick you apart. Therefore, edge rushers become increasingly more important. And this year's draft class matches that trend of the NFL in the increased premium on edge rushers. I also think this is a really good wide receiver class. Not quite as good in terms of depth and talent at the top as last year's class, But still a good class nonetheless. 4 to 5 guys that will be first-round picks. Many guys picked in rounds 2 through 5 who will be productive NFL players. If you missed out on last year's wide receiver class because you were stupid, and several organizations did because they were stupid, you have a chance to somewhat redeem yourself and somewhat be able to get back on the right track in that area, because this is another good wide receiver class. In terms of the weak spots, quarterback. I don't even know that Winston and Mariota are actually slam dunk franchise guys. They both have that potential. But if somebody's going to tell you, and this is again about the narrative, that Mariota is so much cleaner off the field and that makes him the automatic pick, yeah, but does that really matter if that doesn't show on the field? And when it comes to Winston, well, if he was cleaner off the field, he's a hands-down #1 prospect and one of the best quarterback prospects you've seen in a long time. Have you watched the film? Have you actually watched this guy? If he threw 18, 19 interceptions in the ACC in 2014, how many is he going to throw at the NFL level? But the bigger thing to me, besides the narratives about Winston and Mariota, neither one of them, frankly, being for sure things for different varying reasons, but maybe not as different and varying as you've been told or led to believe, is the fact that the quarterback class behind them is incredibly weak. I mean, it could be a situation that unless somebody is just absolutely desperate in reaching for a need, you may not see a third quarterback taken in this 2015 NFL draft until the third, maybe even the fourth round. This is not a good quarterback class. Even Winston and Mariota, while they're clearly 1 and 2, head and shoulders above the rest, they themselves are not can't-miss franchise quarterbacks. Overall, a weak quarterback class. If you're looking for help at that position, you're probably wishing you already had a guy on your roster, or you're looking forward to 2016. Safety is an incredibly weak class this year. It's just amazing to me, as important as the safety position is coming, in my opinion, in the NFL, to see that college just isn't producing the caliber of safety, frankly, that the NFL needs. You're going to see guys that are reached on. A couple of them will pan out. A couple of them will not. But you're talking about last year where you had, what was it, 3 safeties go in the first round. This year you'll just have 1, maybe 2. And that second one will be a reach. No question about it. There's just a lack of talent at the safety position at the top, in the middle, at the back end of the draft. Just not a good class. Similar to tight ends. Max Williams declaring out of Minnesota definitely helps this class. He's probably the #1 tight end. But the talent behind him isn't that great. And with the NFL, with the use of the tight end as a versatile, multifaceted weapon in passing offenses, it's got to be disheartening for NFL GMs to look at what college is giving them, and they're really not giving them much again. Last year's tight end class was pretty weak, and this year's tight end class is even weaker. Some of the trends I think we could see play out during the 2015 NFL draft is that offensive tackles could drop. There's going to be a lot of talk and the narrative said about how strong the tackle class is, even with a guy like Ronnie Stanley being a moron and going back to Notre Dame for another year, that there's lots of talent there, there's depth in this class. But when you look at the recent history of offensive tackles, the past, let's say, 3-4 years out of the NFL draft, especially the high pick ones, the track record really isn't that good. Could that be a trend that causes some of these offensive tackles to be devalued a little bit, and that position to be devalued just a little bit? And an offensive tackle you maybe thought would go in the top 10 goes in the top 15 or top 20 instead. The guy you thought in the 15 to 25 range, does he go even farther back in the first round or even in the early portion of the second round? I think we could see some offensive tackles surprise in terms of how much they drop, unless they are taken by a team where they're going to kick inside to left or right guard, like maybe a Brandon Scherf from Iowa. Another trend is going to be what happens after the big 2 quarterbacks. Where's that #3 quarterback going to go? Who's that #3 quarterback going to be? How many quarterbacks are actually going to be taken in this draft? We know that this is a talented, deep, loaded running back class at all levels. When is that big running back run, so to speak, going to happen? Is it going to take place in rounds 2 and 3? Is it going to be rounds 3, 4, and 5? At some point in time in this 2015 NFL draft, I promise you there is going to be a big run on running backs. We're in a 2-round stretch. You're probably going to see 10 to 12 of them drafted. And it's just a matter of when that's going to happen. It could happen somewhere between the middle of round 2 to the early portion of round 4. Something like that. It's going to happen. There's going to be a big run on running backs because, again, this is a really good class. And with the depth of the edge rushers in this class, is that going to help some of those guys at the top, or is it going to hurt some of those guys at the top? Is the overall talent of that edge rusher class going to prop up some of those top guys where they go even higher than maybe is anticipated? Or because of the depth in talent in that class, are we going to see some guys drop because people are going to look at this guy and say, well, why should I take him here when this guy is just about at the same level and I could take him even further back? That's going to be a very interesting thing as well. Not only do I think the tackles could drop and there's going to be a big run on running backs at some point in time in the round 2 to 4 range, I think you could see some edge rushers drop in part because of the depth of this class. It's going to kind of tighten up the field a little bit, and some teams might not be willing to spend as premium of a pick as many of the NFL media and NFL people anticipate at this point. And then we talk about some of the prospects and some of the ones I think are overrated and underrated as of this moment. First, I'll go to the overrated side, and I'll go to Amari Cooper. And the reason I throw Amari Cooper on this list is not because I don't think he's a legitimate NFL talent, because I do think he's a legit NFL talent. It's not because I don't think he's a #1 wide receiver at the NFL level. I do. I just don't think he's as much of a clear-cut #1 in this class wide receiver as people think. There's a part of me, and as I go through my processes over the next 2 months or so of really evaluating these prospects, you might find out that I don't even have Amari Cooper as my #2 wide receiver in this class. He might be #3. And mock me and say what you want about me, but there's a part of me from last year when my eyes were telling me that Odell Beckham Jr. should have been my #1 receiver, and he was the guy that was popping off the video off to me the most. I kept him at #3 in the wide receiver rankings when I believe maybe in my heart of hearts that he was actually #1 at a time where everybody was telling me he was a second-round pick. I'm just saying, when you look at Amari Cooper, a guy like a Devante Parker who's bigger, a guy like Kevin White who's bigger and stronger and maybe just as fast, teams are going to fall in love with these guys as well. And I don't think it's such a slam dunk that Amari Cooper isn't necessarily a top 5 pick, even though I believe I have him mocked in the top 5 here. It's just he's not as much of a #1 receiver in this class as you might think. Randy Gregory, I don't get it. I've been talking about it for a while. And again, with the quality of edge rushers in this draft, I envision a guy like Randy Gregory potentially dropping. I see a guy like La'el Collins, the safety out of Alabama. Yeah, he's the #1 safety in this class, but how much is that really saying? Furthermore, here's a guy who maybe projects better to the strong side than the free safety side at the NFL level. Our team's going to basically want to spend a top 10 pick on a more explosive athletic version of Mark Barron. I just don't think so. And I think he might be a little bit overrated by the NFL draft media and by some fans. And I look at Brandon Scherff from Iowa, a guy who I personally don't see at this moment how he could stick at left tackle at the NFL level, although I could be proven wrong. A guy that's been mocked as a top 5 or top 10 talent most of the year that I see as a bottom of the round 1, early to mid portion round 2 type of talent. In terms of underrated guys, I look at a couple of pass rushers like Dante Fowler Jr. out of Florida and Bud Dupree out of Kentucky. These are 2 guys that I think will climb as the draft process goes along, in particular Bud Dupree, because he had the misfortune of playing against a lot of spread teams that ran the spread a lot this year. I think it was 7 or 8 games. So you didn't get to see a lot of his upfield pursuit as a pass rusher, but when you did, you had to like what you see. And when you look at his size and his explosiveness and the position and versatility of what he could bring to the table, I think some teams are going to look at him and become very impressed, and he'll probably end up being a guy that's picked in the top half of the first round come the end of April. When I look at offensive linemen, I think the most underrated offensive lineman at this point is TJ Clemmings. I think he has the feet to play left tackle at the NFL level, even though he's playing the right side at Pittsburgh. I love his explosion, his power punch, if you will. I think this is a guy that can legitimately play left tackle, or you can put him in there as a super athletic guard or a hell of a right tackle. He's a guy that people, when they've been sucking the dick of Cedric Obehi and they've been slobbing the schlong of Brandon Scherff and, kissing the ass of Andrus Peat, this is a guy that TJ Clemmings that has really went under the radar, and I don't think it'll be for much longer. And I look at a guy like Michael Bennett from Ohio State. Here's a guy coming from a national championship program who fits that 3 technique type of defensive tackle style that certain teams still value in the NFL, and he doesn't get a lot of love, and I don't think he's valued for being as good of an NFL prospect as he is, and I would be very, very surprised if he didn't end up being a guy taken towards the bottom end at least of the first round come April, because we know every year, especially when it comes to the defensive tackle position, 1 or 2 guys really rise up the boards and really surprise you with how far they can go. So those are just some of my thoughts. Again, my 2-round mock draft, thanks to those of you that actually listened to me on this whole diatribe, is in the description box down below. But these are some of the things you could watch for in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of this class, the trends, the narratives that could be set, and beware of some of the players you've been programmed to believe are better than worse than they actually are. Because a lot of your perspectives, if you watch and if you pay attention and you do your research, I promise you, is going to change a lot in the next 3+ months when it comes to this 2015 NFL Draft.